Hello and welcome to this episode of the Thrive in Five podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful day so far, whenever you're listening to this, whether that is on the commute, on your lunch break, or on your weekend, or whatever you're doing. I hope you're having a great day so far. As the episode title has it given away, we are going to talk about boundaries today. But before you roll your eyes and think, oh, this is not for me, hear me out. Just hang in there for a little bit because I hear you. I used to hate the term boundaries. For me, it always felt a little bit woo woo, a bit like therapy talky, I suppose. It felt like something that was preached by wellness people or people who didn't understand the real world, who didn't understand the world in which I was living with like a busy job and a commute and a partner and a house and priorities and places that I was going in life and things I was doing. It felt very unrealistic. I was always thinking, I remember reading a thing on social media about boundaries at one point while I was like crammed onto a tube train. And I was like, yeah, that's great for you in your stretchy yoga pants and your cute sports bra with your mason jar full of granola. But like, I have a job and I have stuff going on in my life, and I can't just set a boundary with my boss. I can't just say, sorry, boss, who pays my salary and means that I can do all these nice things. But no, I'm not going to reply to that email. I remember thinking, like, come on, like, this is ridiculous. So today I'm going to be a bit more realistic because boundaries are important, but the way we've talked about them in the past isn't necessarily the right way to think about them when you're a professional woman in the real world. We're going to look at what those boundaries actually look like in practice and how you can set them. So, the first question we have to answer then is, what is a boundary? Well, obviously, we have like land boundaries and all of that. But when it comes to boundaries in the slightly therapy talk woo woo sense, they are basically a personal rule or limit that you set to protect your time, energy, well being. They're about defining what is acceptable and non negotiable in your life. In very simple terms, a boundary is the application of a priority. So, if in a non health and fitnessy way, if one of your priorities is to have a dog that is not codependent, you might set a boundary that your dog doesn't sleep in your bed. For me personally, I have completely failed at that one, but that is an example of setting a boundary. My priority is a dog that isn't codependent and that is okay not being upstairs. Therefore, the boundary I set is the dog doesn't come up to bed with us. He does sleep downstairs, but he has to come up for an evening cuddle. Basically, when it comes to health and fitness, boundaries are the foundation of having balance. Without having a boundary in place, it is really easy to get overwhelmed, to get stressed, to get stretched too thin, to hit burnout. When you have a boundary, it basically helps you to apply your priorities so that you can really focus on what matters, whether that is self care, family, health, or work, without sacrificing one or the other. When you don't set boundaries, things start to bleed together. You don't get that lovely work-life balance that you're craving. You can end up feeling burnt out. You can end up feeling frustrated. And when you don't have boundaries in place, it is really hard to pursue the things that matter most to you. And in reality, you already have boundaries in some areas of your life. Like your partner probably doesn't sit in the bathroom with you when you go to the loo. That's a boundary. If they do, then you've got a stronger relationship than mine. You don't discuss your sex life with your boss. Like that is a boundary. I'm trying to think of another example, but there are lots of examples where you have boundaries in place. You have things that you do. You brush your teeth before you go to work in the morning. That is a boundary. You don't go to work with smelly garlic breath. That is a boundary. Boundaries exist already in your life. And when I talk about setting boundaries in this context, what I'm talking about and what I'm kind of wanting you to think about is this idea that when it comes to your health and fitness, having some boundaries in place, having some things in place, you can apply the things that are a priority to you. So you can apply the health and fitness goals, the diet goals, the self-care goals that are a priority to you is really important. When it comes to those boundaries, or any boundary, to be honest, there are two types of boundaries. There are boundaries that you set with yourself, and there are boundaries that you set with others. When it comes to boundaries you set with yourself, these are basically personal commitments. We call them boundaries, but it's basically just things you say to yourself, I'm going to do this. These are often overlooked, but in my mind, these are the most important sorts of boundaries because these are the ones that actually are the ones that help you build confidence. One of the things that we believe in the TFP is that confidence comes from keeping promises you make to yourself. It basically comes from setting a boundary with yourself and adhering to it. When you do that, you build confidence because you learn to trust yourself that you can do the things that you said you would do. And that is what confidence is. It's doing what you said you would do. And having personal boundaries in place is incredibly important. And as an example, an example of a personal boundary that we set within the TFP recently with one of the team, one of my clients was finding that her evenings were being just eaten up by her phone. I'm sure I'm gonna tell you the story and you're gonna be like, yep, that might be me. She'd, check her emails on her phone. She'd have like the Outlook app on her phone, so she would go in and look at that. She would be scrolling on social media. While she was eating her dinner, she would be on her phone until late. She would get into bed and open up TikTok and be scrolling, or open up the news, or like random apps. She'd end up doing things on her phone she didn't even really want to do, but she just felt like her phone was an extension of her arm, and it was eating up her free time. She wasn't enjoying quality time with her partner. She wasn't enjoying watching things on TV, or even being out for dinner. She was picking up her phone. And she realized that the phone habit was cutting into her sleep and impacting her overall energy the next day. It was impacting how she was thinking. It was even impacting things like her posture. Like, she was finding she was more naturally hunched over her phone. And she was even getting things, which I know we've all had this, but where she was convinced her phone was giving her a notification even when it wasn't, just because she was so used to having it attached to her. So one of the boundaries that we've set is actually looked at having a boundary around her phone, having phone limits, having ways that she can prioritize getting enough sleep, because that was something that was really important to her. So we have set a bit of a phone downtime time. So we've said from 9 o'clock, we don't get the phone, don't open the phone and go on social media. She's actually set usage limits on some of her apps. And there's other bits she's done as well, which I will come on to later in the episode. So that's a boundary that you might set with yourself, sort of phone related boundary. But there are also boundaries that you set with others. And these are the ones that we often find challenging. And these are the ones that I used to rail against back in the day, because they're the ones about communicating your limits to others, saying no to stuff, saying no to work or family or friends or clients or parents, their family, or pets. It's having something that you say to somebody else. And it feels difficult because it often requires you to assert your needs or to manage expectations. It can feel selfish, and it can sometimes feel impossible, because there are times when a boundary that somebody else might set might not be the boundary that you set. But these boundaries are essential for reducing stress and for creating space for what matters most in your life. And that doesn't have to mean, to be clear, it doesn't have to mean doing what I thought it meant, which was basically telling my boss to piss off if they emailed me after 5 o'clock. But it might look like, for example, I had to have a conversation with my boss that said, I'm really okay with you emailing me after 7 o'clock. I don't check my emails after 7 o'clock. So if you email me after 7 o'clock, I'm not going to respond until I check my phone when I'm on the train in the morning. That'll be about 7 a.m. If you need me urgently, send me a WhatsApp. And that meant that we had a boundary in place. It was a flexible boundary that we could both operate across, but it meant that we were both clear on the expectations. That's an example of a work boundary. From a health and fitness perspective, these boundaries can feel a bit hard because it often involves pushing back against another's expectations of you. And it's something that I used to really struggle with, boundaries around this, particularly with my partner, because I am a foodie. I love to eat, and food is a big part of our relationship. And there was a period of time where I felt like my partner was ruining my diet, because he always wanted to share like higher calorie foods whenever he'd had a tough day. He'd come home from work with like cakes or sweets or crisps, or he'd want to open a bottle of wine like midweek. And I found it really challenging because I'd planned out my food for the day. I knew what fitted in my calories. I'd planned to have a little snack, but I hadn't planned to have 3 Krispy Kreme donuts. I'd planned out my food across the week, so I knew that I had more calories to play with at the weekend. And I was like, if I have this now, it's going to take away from my calories at the weekend, and I don't want that. I want to enjoy my weekend. I don't really want this, but he wants me to have it. And it created a lot of conflict. It created a lot of discomfort for me, and it made me feel quite uncomfortable. It made me feel like I was ruining my diet. It made me often end up going over my calories, or I'd end up in a place where I was dieting the way I didn't like, where I was over restricting during the day to make up for the fact that I'd had these donuts later in the evening. And I had to set a boundary with him that basically said, I love you, and I'm sorry that you've had a bad day, and I really want to share food and enjoy it with you, but I'm not going to have those sorts of foods that you're bringing home every day. I'm not going to share them with you, but I will share them with you at the weekend to make an occasion of it. And actually, you know what? Let's plan one day during the week where I manage my calories a bit differently, so we can have a little bit of a treat, and let's make a bit of a moment of it. And we actually did it while we were watching Bake Off, because you've got to have cake whilst you watch Bake Off. Like, that's just the rule. So that's an example of how you might set boundaries with others. Within the TFP, we have what we call the boundary blueprint, which I will use with the team where they are maybe struggling to set a boundary, or they feel like there's maybe an element of work and life and health and fitness all kind of bleeding together, and things are maybe feeling tough. So what I'm going to do today is actually walk you through how we do the boundary blueprint. So you're getting a little behind the scenes here. And it's a five-step process. So the first thing is to identify the priority area. So you're going to think about that priority that you want to put into action. And a good way to do this is to actually have a think about a part of your life where you are feeling overwhelmed, or where you feel like time is constantly being consumed. So this could be that you're finding that you're working late into the evening. It could be that you're finding it really difficult to do your workouts because you're running late from work. For the client I discussed in earlier in the episode, it was that her phone use in the evening. She realized that her phone use in the evenings in particular was affecting her ability to relax and recharge and switch off and sort of come away from work. Note that we didn't go in and say we're going to tackle your phone use overall, because that's quite stressful. We started here, and then eventually we realized actually there was also an issue with her phone in the gym, so we went and tackled that next. But we're just going to focus here on one particular priority area and one particular area where that's popping up. The next thing you're going to do is to define the boundary that you need to have in place. So what you're going to do is have a think about how you could protect that area of your life. So for this client, it was having a simple boundary that I will not check my phone after 9 p.m. and I'm going to delete work apps off my phone at the end of the working day. She basically realized that she could re-download Outlook and set it up very, very quickly. So why did she have it on her phone? She basically removed any kind of temptation. The next thing you're going to do is define why this is important. It's really important when you're setting a boundary to not just put it in place without really digging into kind of the deeper reason behind it, because that's what's going to help you stick with it long term. So you're going to think about what the positive impact of that boundary is going to be, what it's going to do for your life, how it's going to make your life better. So for this client, she was very clear that it was going to give her evenings back. It was going to mean she actually enjoyed the TV she was watching, and it was going to mean that she actually slept better and had more energy the next day and didn't feel quite so sluggish, and didn't end up long-term kind of putting on weight because she was hungry and stressed out and just grabbing a croissant rather than having her nutritious breakfast. We kind of got very deep on the why and really thought ahead. So there was a real reason to do it. Step 4 is then to think about what challenges might come up, because when you're setting a boundary, it's going to be hard. Like, this is a habit and a behavior that you've had in place for a little while. So when you're trying to put a new boundary in place, have a think about the things that might pop up so you can prepare yourself. So this client identified that social media notifications might be a bit of a temptation to break her boundary. So she set up a do not disturb mode on her phone after 9 o'clock. So she had no opportunity to get distracted. She also, as I said, she deleted work apps off her phone, so she couldn't go in and check them, even if she didn't have notifications. Because I don't know about you, but for me, if I can check my emails for work in particular, I will do. It's almost a little bit like an itch I have to scratch. So I have to remove the temptation. On a slightly separate note, I have a boundary in place when it comes to work, that when I finish work, I put my laptop away and I shut my office door and I don't come back in, because otherwise I would be wandering in and out of this office. I would be wandering in and out, checking messages and making sure everything's okay and doing bits and bobs, and it's not good for me. That's just a little aside. And then step 5, you're going to communicate and commit to your boundary. So write it down if you need to, share it with someone who might be affected if it's a type 2 boundary, and commit to sticking to it. For this client, she shared that boundary with her partner. So they both knew that she wouldn't be on her phone after 9 o'clock. He actually also committed to it, and they kind of put their phones in a little pile in the corner so they couldn't touch them. She made a commitment to honor this boundary each night. We actually had it in her daily habits within her coaching app so she could tick it off. And she also shared it with me. She committed to this boundary with me, which is a part of the boundary blueprint, because having that extra bit of accountability makes all the difference. So those are the 5 steps. Identify the priority area, define the boundary that you need, determine why it's important, identify anything that might pop up and get in your way, and communicate and commit to it. If you do this, if you set some clear boundaries with yourself and with others, you can protect your time, you can reduce stress, and you can create the space for self-care and focus, and actually prioritize your goals, actually achieve what you want to achieve. I think for me, the reason that I found boundaries quite challenging at first was because it felt abstract. It felt like there was no real tangible benefit. It was like, set a boundary so you can like protect your space and like take care of you and like protect what matters. And I was like, but what is that? Like, how is this going to benefit me? Which is exactly why we have a step 3 in the boundary blueprint, to define why it's important. Because when you define why it's important, you realize that boundaries don't just help you protect your energy and maintain what matters most. It actually helps you to achieve your goals. It helps you to put your priorities into action. It helps you to go to the gym. It helps you to stick to your calories. It helps you to lose weight. It helps you to reach a place where you are working hard and enjoying that life. And when you have boundaries in place consistently, you can thrive. It is the definition of being healthy, is having things in place that protect your priorities. So take a moment today to think about one boundary that you can set, whether it's something personal, like limiting phone use, or something you need to communicate to others, like being a little bit firmer on your work hours, like I was with my boss. Maybe it's something like putting work away at a certain time. Maybe it's something completely different, but commit to setting that boundary this week and just see how it feels. With all this stuff, try it, test it, and go again. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about this idea of balance, but from a health and fitness perspective, and why balance can actually come from health and fitness goals when done right. It doesn't always. Stay tuned tomorrow, but let me know how your boundary setting exercise goes as well. Pop me a message on social media. I would love to hear from you. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will chat to you tomorrow.